Some people don't experience silence as peaceful. They experience it as uncomfortable. Not in a dramatic way, just enough to make them reach for something. A phone, a song, a video in the background, a TV that no one is really watching, a podcast playing while doing something else. Anything that keeps the room from becoming completely still. And if this sounds familiar, it usually doesn't mean you hate quiet. It means your brain may have slowly learned that silence is not neutral. It means silence now feels like something is missing. And once that happens, stillness can begin to feel strangely loud. The psychology behind this often begins with what your mind accepted as normal. For many people, especially those who grew up online, there was almost never a true baseline of silence. There was always something running in the background. Music while studying, videos while eating, a second screen while watching the first, tabs left open, notifications breaking the space every few minutes, earbuds in during the walk, something playing before sleep. Over time, the brain stops treating input as extra. It starts treating it as baseline reality. That becomes the environment your nervous system adapts to. So silence no longer feels like peace. It feels like the sudden absence of something the brain had already learned to expect. And the mind reacts to that absence the same way it reacts to any broken pattern, with subtle discomfort. But the deeper reason silence feels hard is not the silence itself. It's what silence reveals. When external input disappears, your internal world becomes easier to hear. Thoughts that were buried under stimulation begin to rise. Half-finished worries, tiny unresolved emotions, stress loops you didn't notice during the day, mental tabs that were never really closed. This is why many people say the room feels too quiet. What they are really describing is the moment their own mind becomes louder than the environment. And for a brain that has become deeply adapted to constant novelty, that sudden internal clarity can feel deeply uncomfortable. Not because anything is wrong, but because awareness suddenly returns all at once. This is also why silence often creates the feeling of something being unfinished. The discomfort is not always fear. Sometimes it feels more like incompletion, like the brain is still expecting the next sound, the next scroll, the next emotional micro-hit, the next small distraction. When those don't arrive, the mind keeps searching. That's why some people instinctively unlock their phone even when there is nothing to check. The action itself is not always about interest. Sometimes it's about restoring the pattern the nervous system expects. This is the psychology of the unfinished mind. A brain that became used to layered input can mistake silence for a system error, as if something that should be happening suddenly stopped, and that gap creates discomfort. For some people, this pattern goes even deeper than technology. Sometimes it starts in childhood. If someone grew up in a house where there was always noise, the television constantly running, people moving around, doors opening and closing, family tension, arguments, or simply a chaotic environment, the brain may have learned that noise equals normal life. Sometimes noise even became associated with safety, because when the house was silent, it meant something was wrong, someone was upset, a conflict was building, something uncertain was about to happen. In environments like this, the nervous system doesn't just adapt to sound, it begins to depend on stimulation as emotional orientation. Noise becomes a map. And later in life, silence can unconsciously recreate the same sense of uncertainty. This is why some adults feel oddly uneasy in perfectly calm rooms. The body remembers patterns long before the conscious mind explains them. Now combine that childhood wiring with modern digital life. Infinite scrolling, second screen habits, videos playing while texting, music layered under every task, and the pattern becomes even stronger. The brain gets trained to move from one micro input to another without ever returning to true stillness. So when the room finally becomes silent, the nervous system doesn't immediately calm down. It waits for the next notification, the next sound, the next reason to shift attention. That waiting is what many people mistake as not being able to relax. But what's really happening is something more specific. The brain is searching for the next expected hit of stimulation, and until it arrives, silence can feel emotionally itchy. This is why the hand often moves toward the phone before conscious thought even happens. The body is trying to restore the familiar pattern. But silence is rarely the real problem. Silence simply removes the layer that was covering what was already there. Fatigue, mental clutter, loneliness, unprocessed stress, emotional leftovers from the day. Silence does not create these things, it reveals them. And that is why stillness can feel harder than noise, because noise distracts. Silence exposes, and exposure can feel uncomfortable when the mind has been running on automatic for too long. The important thing to understand is this: nothing is wrong with you. If silence feels difficult, it usually means your brain learned a different baseline, a baseline built on noise, input, multitasking, stimulation, and constant mental movement. Stillness feels strange not because you are broken, but because your nervous system became familiar with something else. And once you understand that, silence stops feeling like a threat. It starts feeling like information, a mirror, a way of seeing what your mind was carrying underneath the noise. And sometimes the discomfort is not a sign to escape. Sometimes it's the first sign that your mind is finally becoming visible again.